Oh my, what do we have here? In front of the camera on the TheApostleP channel, the long-awaited perfect ZT Hinderer. Could it be a ZT0562 in carbon fiber and M390? Yes, it is. No one, and I do mean no one, is more excited than I to have this knife in front of the camera and in the house for a couple weeks for evaluation and sharpening. Stay tuned, guys. Let's see if this is really what we've been waiting for. Hi gang, Rob here. It is the afternoon of 21 September 2014. And yes, the long-awaited and hotly anticipated carbon fiber and M390 version of the Zero Tolerance ZT0562 has arrived. And gosh, I think during the first week these things were available. Got a message from my sharpening customer, Mon. He had scored one of these, had it outfitted with a nicely blue anodized over travel stop / stabilizer disc, and wanted to send it to me for sharpening, and I couldn't say yes fast enough. Because my love-hate relationship with Zero Tolerance, and specifically the Hinderer design Zero Tolerance line, is well documented. I take a lot of flack for it. And this knife is like the great white hope of the ZT Hinderer line for me. You know, all these ZT knives over the last 2 or 3 years, whether it's the 560 / 561, whether it's, which I don't have available for the camera today, or the 550, this is the second one of those that I've had, the 566, even the Rexford, the ZT0801, they've all had their positives. And as far as I'm concerned, this reviewer, they've all had 1 or 2 characteristics which made them irresponsibly poor offerings for their price point and knives that I don't want to own, with the exception of the 550, which despite its flaws, I love. So, what didn't I like? Let's start with the 561. What didn't I like about the 561? I thought it was a little too big, for starters. Not very pocketable, not superb ergonomics, just a little hard to reach the controls, with a nearly 4-inch blade, longer than a Hinderer XM18, just bigger in every dimension, and just bigger to a fault. Also, I felt like the mechanism, let's get this box out of the way, I felt like the mechanism was unnecessarily loose and floppy, meaning it wouldn't stay where you put it. This 562 does not exhibit that. This concept of smoothness that everybody chases with these ball bearing pivots, smoothness is great. Freeness is great when it helps the knife actually work better while being used as a knife, or being open and closed to be used for a knife. If it does it safely and doesn't do unpredictable things. I think the 560 did unpredictable things. It, closed when you didn't want it to. think you had it release over the detent ball, and then you'd have to double clutch and you'd fight the detent ball, and sometimes your thumb would be in the way and then it would close on you. The 560 had unnecessary and uncomfortable jimping in this area of the handle. Also down here in the ring finger and pinky area. Notice how this jimping appears only on the inside surfaces of the frame and the liner. Doesn't really cause you to have any discomfort with your gripping fingers. I have said, and I will continue to say, that the ZT-0560 was a marketing knife. Cashes in on Rick Hinderer's name. Looks a lot like a Hinderer knife. Has Hinderer styling cues. Has ball bearings. It has everything the marketing copy needs to have to sell knives. It just didn't work very well. And, you know, it was a blade made of Elmax steel. The Kai International, or Zero Tolerance, did a very poor job grinding and heat treating. So, it was a miss. The little brother, the 550, is a knife that I've really grown to love. Blade of S35 VN, although it's a little short and stocky, not a great slicer. And we'll get to that concept when we start talking about this knife in depth, because it is a replication of Rick Hinderer's quote-unquote slicer grind. So it should be the best slicer of the bunch. Wouldn't you be right in assuming that? We'll see. The 550, no flipper, no bearings. Big, large diameter, beautifully smooth. Phosphor bronze washers. The knife is super fast, super smooth. Actually, other than being a little heavy and clunky, there's not much to complain about on this knife. Oh yes, very suspect hardware. Watch my older videos on this knife if you want to know what that's about. So, as I approach the review of the 562, I do it with great anticipation. Why? Well, what didn't I like about the 560? It was too big. Well, this knife is almost exactly the same size as a Hinderer XM18. Blade length is 3.5 inches. Handle length 4 3/4. Overall length 8 1/4. Perfect. I mean, perfect. Perfect. Everything works as it should. Everything is where you expect it to be. Only one little ergonomic hit I'm going to give this knife, and frankly, it pretty much only pertains to left-handers, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Blade steel. That was another hit I gave the 560. Well, and I will say this, give credit where credit is due. Kai has begun, as of September 2014 and before, has begun to do a much better job heat treating their Elmax. And it is a very high performing steel. Still extremely difficult to sharpen, but I welcome the arrival in the Hinderer ZT lineup of Bohler M390. Also a powdered metallurgy steel. Very stainless. You know, it's a modern super steel. It's very high in chromium, very high in carbon. Makes lots of vanadium carbides, sort of a carbide-rich, large carbide steel. But from a sharpening standpoint, much closer to S30V than it is to Elmax or S90V. Very high performing steel, but won't kill you at the sharpening bench. I love that. And guys, if you're collectors, and God love you, if you're collectors who do nothing but buy knives, put them in Pelican cases, show them to your buddies, cut paper with them, and buy, sell, and trade them. None of this means anything to you. You buy a blade steel because of its reputation and the value that it holds. Because let's face it, you're never really going to push it to a level of performance that requires it to perform to a level that made it cost so much. And you're never going to sharpen it. You probably don't sharpen any of your knives. So what is the trendy cool steel of the day? Can you talk about it with your knife buddies and it sounds cool? Yeah. But, for the real world, for guys who appreciate high performance knives because of the way they cut, the way the ease of maintenance that they have, and how the user can bring them back to at or better than their original cutting ability. And let's face it, guys, for those of you who really appreciate cutting ability, the ease with which a knife will be made better than its factory cutting ability is huge. And this here 562, I believe, is a little better than its factory cutting ability. Let's just look at initial sharpness off my bench. It's near silence going through the Natchez Shooter Supply catalog paper. We're talking a level of initial sharpness that's very similar in my book to, it's definitely on par with S30V or S35VN. I would even say M390 takes an edge approaching the keenness of D2 or AUS-8A and holds on to it like nobody's business. Great improvement. Love it. So what else didn't we like about the 561 or 560? Well, that loose flappy mechanism is one of them. And this is how I like a knife to close. I like it to stay where I put it with the lock bar and the detent ball pressing against the blade, but I also like it to fall closed with a little shake. The reason I like it to stay where I put it is because as I'm pulling my thumb out of the way, I don't want the blade falling on my thumb and cutting it. Now here's my one hit ergonomically that I'm going to give this knife. And frankly, it kind of disappears after very little time using it. If you put your thumb in the natural position to disengage the lock, clear, kind of up here by the front, you'll lay it into this recess and kind of naturally. Okay. The flipper comes and starts to pinch the thumb. Uh-oh. Now I'm trying to close it with my index finger. Well, why won't it close? Because I haven't overcome the detent ball. I have to back up on that lock bar and then make sure that my thumb is in a position where if the lock bar hits it, it hits it at a point that's past the detent ball. And I guess it's a sort of a muscle memory thing. You just sort of learn, instead of really digging into that choil like that, now I can't close it, you just kind of back up a little and everything's fine. And it is more pronounced when I'm using my left hand than my right. Okay? That's the only ergo hit I'm going to give this knife. In every single regard other than that, all the grips are just amazing. And look at that. I have exactly the jimping I need, exactly in the place I need it, without leaving myself a cheese grater behind the flipper. Never understood that, never will. I think it's absolutely silly. Big win on the 562 for the spine design. Okay, now let's look at the hammer grip. Oh man, guys, that is so comfortable. I know that flipper is there, but it in no way digs into the knuckle of my index finger. Let's go draw a cut. A little flipper intrusion into the web of my hand, but again, not in any way uncomfortable. And we go reverse grip. Not the best grip for this knife. It's kind of a stretch to get up here on the flat. Not bad though, just if you had a hand just a little larger than mine, you'd sort of be there. Let me compare that for a moment to the 550. Yeah, I like the reverse grip better on the 550, believe it or not. Okay. So, as far as a zero tolerance Hinderer that has the ergonomics of a Hinderer, this is it. None of the other ones really do that. At least not as well as this knife does. How about this new pocket clip, fellas? Look familiar? Well, from here down, looks like an XM18 clip. It performs like an XM18 clip, but it is deep carry. And you know, the jury's still out on deep carry. I'm not sure that I love it. I have not carried this knife. It's just it is a customer knife, and I don't want to be the first gouge in the pocket clip. I have taken it in and out of pocket. It's not too hard to extract. It has great retention, and it does insert well. And isn't this cool? Instead of trying to make a reversible left to right pocket clip by threading into this very thin stainless steel liner on the carbon fiber side, if you're a lefty, we have a Browse-like reversibility. This pillar standoff at the back of the knife sandwiches a tab of the pocket clip between either side of the frame for left or right hand carry. It's beautiful. It's simple. It's effective. It works. The clip doesn't wiggle side to side. It's just really, really nicely done. I have had this knife apart. Needed to do a little internal clean and a little spot treatment for mine. And I will tell you that because we're not asking any more of this hardware than it's designed to do, like grab one or two threads of a very thin stainless steel liner, it does a really good job. All the hardware was very burr free, nicely black oxide or parkerized coated. Everything's great. The only exception, the only hit I'm going to give the hardware, and guys, this is a head shaker, this pivot. They take a knife that's nearly perfect and they got to make it marketable, don't they? We can't put that plain hardware store looking pivot in this stunning knife, can we? No, we can't do that. We have to put a custom looking pivot in the 562. So what did Zero Tolerance do? Well, they took the pivot from the ZT801 because it looks custom, because it has 5 dimples around the perimeter of the Torx screw. It also has no method of restraint for the female side of the pivot, meaning the barrel of the pivot is not D-shaped and it doesn't go through a D-shaped hole, and it doesn't have a head shaped like a hex, which cannot turn in the handle. So what do you get with that? Well, what you get is a pivot that can turn and a pivot that does turn. And I have now handled 6 knives with this pivot. 4 ZT801s, this 562, and a 566 for a customer. 3 of the 6, while flipping the knife open and closing it for any extended period of time with a well-applied amount of blue Loctite, had the pivots loosened. 3 of the 6. 2 of the 4 801s and this knife. It's just not a good design. It's not dependable. Loctite works in a small diameter thread if everything isn't trying to turn. But you got a small diameter thread here without a super tight fit, male to female, and both sides of this pivot are allowed to turn in this handle because nothing's restraining it. I've never seen a pivot come loose with this old style Kershaw pivot where the female cup is restrained in the handle. Just a bad choice. Guys, if you buy one of these, unless you get lucky and have a real tight thread fit, your pivot will come loose. You can graduate up to brown Loctite. If you'd like, you can try a little Teflon tape in your threads. You can super glue the flange of your female side to the titanium frame. Some combination. I would suggest going to brown Loctite first before you do any of those more drastic measures. In this knife, the pivot loosened while I was sharpening it. So, just holding the knife on the Edge Pro table and moving stones across it made the pivot come loose. Just that little bit of sideways torque on the blade, a little up and down movement of the stone against the blade. I had enough force to make that pivot loose, and by the time I got done sharpening, it was noticeably and alarmingly loose. And it did have blue Loctite applied from the factory, and it appeared to have been done well on a clean, dry pivot screw. So I was asking my buddy One All's Pub the other day, as I was going over him my impressions about the knife, going over with him my impressions about this knife. I asked him the question, when will Zero Tolerance run out of feet to shoot themselves in? They've got a perfectly functional, rock solid pivot they use in many of their knives. It works. They've got another pivot, and they have to know this, that by design works itself loose. And they're going to sell a knife online, street price for $240. They're going to put zero tolerance on it. I guess that's supposed to mean zero tolerance for defects. And this pivot has enough history. People know it comes loose. Kai knows it comes loose. Zero Tolerance knows it comes loose. And they make a decision to put it in this knife. What would be wrong with that pivot? I think it actually goes better with the knife. I don't know. Oh, maybe they don't like it because it works. I don't know. Okay. So, other than that, what do we got? Well, let's talk about flipping action, shall we? It is a flipper. And as long as you don't put any pressure on the lock bar with your ring finger, which if you do, by the way, it makes the knife, it's almost like having a safety because you can't open it. So, it takes a little learning curve, as most flippers with insanely abrupt detents do. You got to learn to keep your fingers away from the lock bar as you're trying to open it. But you learn that quickly. Doesn't matter what you do, the knife just flies open. Perfect flipping action, no doubt about that. They got it right. And it better have too. Why is that? Well, take a look at these not thumb studs. I guess Zero Tolerance or Mr. Hinderer, or both of them by committee, have decided to end this debate about whether these are thumb studs on a Hinderer. These are not. You can't use them to open the knife if you wanted to. They have no terracing. There you go. On the left side you can. Hey, look at that. I got it. But it's not easy, boys and girls. So it's really a flipper. The thumb studs are blade stops in the open position. There's another improvement, as all Zero Tolerance titanium frame lock knives current production now have. We have a nicely nested stainless steel lock bar insert. So All your contact blade tang to lock bar is handled by a steel lock bar insert, and it works extremely well. You get no stick, you get no slip, you get pretty doggone consistent engagement. There's me opening the knife while pushing on the lock bar. What do you see there, guys? 50%? Now I'll open it gently with no pressure on the lock bar. What do you got there? 30%? That's pretty normal for slippery surface on slippery surface. It doesn't feel, you know, like mush. If you put pressure on it when it's open, it might slide over a little bit, but not in an unsettling or alarming way. I like the knife. Fit and finish, and guys, you're never going to hear me bash zero tolerance for fit and finish. Machining and finish quality have always been their strengths. No exception on this knife. All the components fit together as designed. The grinds are pretty darn beautiful, I must say. And the last thing I want to talk about, though, before we go, doing a blade wipe, I've never actually been able to spend much time with a slicer ground Hinderer, and I've never been able to wrap my mind around it. How you get a flat grind with a consistent thickness behind the edge from tip to root when your grind is only half an inch high at the base and an inch high at the belly. I've never been able to get that. How do you do that? You're starting at the same blade thickness. So how do you get remotely the same blade thickness at the edge while you're grinding at the same angle for twice as far? Well, the answer is you don't. This is not truly a flat ground blade. It's what I would call a spiral flat. So the angle of this grind out here at the belly is very shallow. It's very steep in here at the root. So to get from full thickness to, let's say, 40 thousandths behind the edge in half an inch of grind, obviously this angle's got to be steeper. If you're doing that over an inch out here, that steep angle can be shallower, has to be, which makes the knife a bit of a challenge to sharpen on an Edge Pro. You wicked edge guys won't care because you got plenty of flat to grab with your clamp up here. This is, I think, an inadequate amount of flat for the Edge Pro for a blade this long. Normally I'm going to use my main bevel, this area of the blade, on a flat ground knife on the Edge Pro, but man, it just won't sit flat because it's ground in a spiral flat. It also makes it kind of interesting in edge profile when you get done. I'm not sure slicer is a great name for this grind. Normally when we think of a blade that is a slicer, we think of a knife that's pretty thin back here through the main cutting edge, and we do our fine work back here, and one that probably thickens a little bit at the tip to make it more robust. This knife is thickest right back here, probably thinnest through the belly, and then it might thicken up just a bit at the tip because there's not a lot of distal taper. Frankly, I don't love it. I would have rather seen them use the blade grind on the 561 in this size blade. The 561, which is different than either a Hinderer slicer or a Hinderer Sponto, frankly is a better slicer than either if it's ground thick or thin enough. This knife really is no better a slicing profile than my 550, which I think of as kind of stubby and thick. So if you were hoping for wicked slicing ability like a Kershaw Skyline or a Sebenza Nsingo with this slicer grind, you're going to be disappointed. Doesn't make it good or bad, it just makes it a Hinderer. They are what they are. Neat finish though. You got a beautiful grinder satin on the primary bevel and on the swedge, and then a nice glistening stone wash in the flats. Just nicely done. Matches the stone wash on the titanium really well. So bottom line, do I want one? Will I buy one? Oh. Oh man, it's $90 more than a nicely, tastefully pimped used 550. Very comparable steel. I'm gonna wait for a good deal on a used one. I think I'd like to own one of these in the 190 to 200 range in a year or two, and I probably will. Am I gonna line up to pay $240 when they come back in stock? No, I'm not. Just not quite special enough, and still with some Achilles heel problems that ZT just won't seem to eliminate, which is odd for a company named Zero Tolerance. That's all for the ZT0562 M390 CF debut on the Apostle P channel. Grace to you and peace, my friends, from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the Word and Mons 562 are sharp.